The sanctum sanctorum no longer existed in any recognizable form. What had once been Earth's greatest mystical fortress now hung suspended in a fractured pocket of reality, its walls bleeding between dimensions. Stone dissolved into starlight, then reformed as bone, then flickered back to stone again. The building itself screamed, a low, resonant sound that vibrated through the fabric of existence. At its center, Dr. Stephen Strange floated in a maelstrom of stolen power. His body had become a canvas of corruption. Tendrils of darkness writhed beneath his skin like serpents made of void. His eyes blazed with the light of 1,000 consumed souls, crimson and violet, and colors that had no names in human language. The cloak of levitation hung in tatters, trying desperately to flee its master even as it remained bound to him. Around Strange's form, the ghostly images of every dark entity he'd absorbed flickered in and out of visibility. Demons howling silently, elder gods with too many eyes, things that had never been alive twisting in perpetual agony. Before him, suspended in rings of eldritch energy, hung the spell. It was beautiful and terrible, a geometric impossibility of golden light and shadow that pulsed with the heartbeat of the universe itself. Each rotation drew more energy from the cosmos, more life, more time. Stars dimmed in distant galaxies. Civilizations that had stood for millennia simply ceased to exist, their histories unwritten in an instant. The spell didn't just destroy, it consumed, feeding everything that had ever been into Stephen Strange's infinite hunger. "All I ever wanted," Strange whispered to the emptiness, his voice layered with 1,000 other voices, "was to save her." The air tore open. Wong emerged first, his hands already weaving defensive shields as he stepped through a portal that immediately collapsed behind him. His face was haggard, aged beyond his years by the weight of what he was witnessing. Behind him came the remnants of the mystic defenders, 12 sorcerers from Kamar-Taj, each one channeling power through ancient relics. They spread out in a practiced formation, but their movements carried the desperate energy of those who knew they were already too late. "Stephen!" Wong's voice cracked across the void. "You have to stop this. The universe is dying." Strange's head tilted, the motion unnaturally smooth. When he spoke, reality rippled. "The universe was always dying, Wong. Entropy, heat death, the inevitable cold. I'm simply accelerating the process. And when it's done, when I hold all of existence within me, I'll have the power to rewrite everything. Christine will live." "Christine is dead," Wong's composure shattered. "She's been dead for years. You're destroying trillions of lives for a ghost." "She's not a ghost to me." Wong's hands snapped forward. The crimson bands of Cyttorak erupted from his palms, brilliant red energy wrapping around Strange in binding coils that had held gods. The other sorcerers joined immediately, chains of mystic force binding sigils, sealing spells that drew on the very foundations of reality. For a moment, Strange simply hung there, wrapped in enough magical restraint to imprison a demon lord. Then he smiled. The absorbed entities within him surged outward. A thing with wings of shadow and a mouth full of galaxies tore through the crimson bands like paper. A formless horror that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously shredded the binding sigils. The chains dissolved as a creature of pure entropy touched them, reducing millennia-old magic to cosmic dust in seconds. Strange didn't move. He didn't need to. "You taught me," he said softly, almost fondly, "that a sorcerer's strength comes from the entities he can call upon. I've spent years, lifetimes in some dimensions, finding every dark power that ever existed. I've bargained with them, bound them, and finally, I became them." Wong's shield barely materialized before the counterattack hit. A wave of dark energy crashed against the assembled sorcerers like a tsunami of hate. 3 of them vanished instantly, erased from existence so completely that Wong couldn't remember their names. The others screamed as the spell burned through their defenses, searing flesh and soul alike. "Shields of the Seraphim!" Wong roared, and golden light blazed to life around the survivors. It held barely against the onslaught. Strange watched with mild interest as Wong rallied his forces. The master sorcerer was already weaving another attack, his hands moving in patterns so complex they seemed to have too many fingers. The other sorcerers joined their power to his, creating a composite spell that drew on every tradition of magic Earth had ever known. The flames of the Faltine met the icy tendrils of Ixthalan. The Vishanti's light clashed with darkness stolen from the Darkhold. Dimensional scissors tried to cut Strange from reality itself, while temporal loops attempted to trap him in an eternal moment before his corruption. It was the most powerful combined assault the mystic arts could produce. Strange caught it in one hand. The composite spell compressed, squeezed down by impossible force until all that remained was a small sphere of dying light. Strange held it up, studying it the way a curious child might examine an insect. "Impressive," he acknowledged. "If I were still the man I was, if I were still Stephen Strange, Sorcerer Supreme, this might have actually inconvenienced me." He crushed the sphere. The backlash hit the sorcerers like a physical blow. 2 more fell, their life forces drained into Strange's spell. Wong stumbled, blood streaming from his nose, but he didn't fall, couldn't fall, not while there was still a chance. "You are still Stephen Strange," Wong shouted, desperation bleeding into his voice. "Somewhere inside that thing you've become, my friend is still there. The man who swore an oath to protect this reality." For just a fraction of a second, something flickered in Strange's expression. Pain, regret, the ghost of the man he'd been. Then it was gone, drowned beneath the weight of 1,000 stolen souls. "Your friend," Strange said quietly, "died the moment Christine did. What's left is just purpose. And I am so close, Wong, so close to having the power to fix everything." The universe trembled. Another galaxy went dark. Time itself was beginning to unravel, past and future bleeding into an eternal present. Through the fragmenting walls of the sanctum, Wong could see glimpses of what was coming, a void without stars, without light, without anything except Stephen Strange, alone forever in the darkness of his own making. Wong's hands moved in a pattern he'd sworn never to use, the spell the Ancient One had forbidden, the one that would kill the caster. "Then I'm sorry, Stephen," Wong whispered, "but I can't let you do this." His eyes blazed white as he channeled every remaining ounce of his life force into a single, perfect strike. The spell Wong unleashed had no name in any living language. It was older than Kamar-Taj, older than the sanctums, older than human civilization itself. The Ancient One had shown it to him once, in a moment of terrible necessity, and made him swear never to speak of it. It was a spell that turned the caster into a living bomb of pure mystical energy. Every spell they'd ever learned, every oath they'd ever sworn, every moment of training compressed into a single annihilating point. It would kill Wong, but it would also unmake anything it touched. The air around him ignited with white fire. His body became translucent, then transparent as his physical form converted entirely into magical force. The remaining sorcerers stumbled back, shielding their eyes from the blinding radiance. Wong's voice echoed from everywhere and nowhere, multiplied across dimensions. "For the Vishanti, for Earth, for Christine, you fool!" He struck. The impact shattered what remained of the sanctum. Walls exploded outward into 1,000 dimensions simultaneously. The spell Strange had been weaving, that beautiful, terrible geometry of universal consumption, flickered and cracked. For the first time since beginning his dark ascension, Stephen Strange actually staggered backward. The white fire clung to him, burning away layers of absorbed darkness. Entities within him shrieked as they were annihilated, their essences scattered across the cosmic winds. Strange's form flickered. For just a moment, Wong could see his friend beneath the corruption, the man with tired eyes and hands that had once healed instead of destroyed. "Wong, no!" Strange's voice, his real voice, broke through the chorus of stolen souls. "You don't have to." But Wong was already gone, his consciousness fragmenting into the spell itself. Where he had stood, only white fire remained, burning with the fury of a man who would sacrifice everything to save a universe. And then the Ancient One arrived. She didn't walk or teleport or portal in. She simply was, materializing in the space between heartbeats. Her bald head gleamed with astral light, her yellow robes untouched by the chaos surrounding her. But her eyes, those ancient, knowing eyes, held infinite sadness. "Hello, Stephen," she said softly. Strange's head snapped toward her, his corrupted features twisting with rage and something that might have been shame. "You're dead. I watched you die. You can't be here." "Death is not what you think it is. I told you that once." The Ancient One moved forward, her feet touching nothing as she glided through the dissolving reality. "I exist now outside time, outside death. I am memory, I am warning, I am the consequence you refuse to see." She raised her hand, and the mirror dimension bloomed around them like a flower made of glass. Infinite reflections of the dying universe stretched in every direction, each one showing a different moment of collapse, a different timeline where Strange had made different choices, a different reality where Christine lived, and the Stephen Strange who loved her was happy. "Look at them, Stephen. Look at what you're destroying for your obsession." Strange did look, his eyes, burning with stolen power, tracked across the endless variations. In one, he and Christine grew old together. In another, she died, but he moved on, finding peace in service. In a third, he never became a sorcerer at all, just a surgeon with steady hands and a full heart. "Lies," Strange hissed, but his voice cracked. "Illusions to manipulate me. Truth to free you." The Ancient One's expression gentled. "You were my greatest student, Stephen, the one with the most potential, the most dedication. But you were also the one I feared most, because I saw this. I saw what your love could become when twisted by grief." The white fire of Wong's sacrifice spell still burned, eating away at Strange's accumulated darkness. He was weaker now, more vulnerable than he'd been in years. The Ancient One knew it. Strange knew it. This was the moment for the final push, the last chance to pull him back from the abyss. She stepped closer, her hand outstretched. "It's not too late. Let it go. Let her go. The universe doesn't have to end. Wong doesn't have to have died for nothing." For a long, terrible moment, Strange stood frozen. The entities within him writhed and whispered, urging him forward, demanding he continue, promising that victory was so close. But beneath that chorus, a small voice, his own voice, barely audible, screamed for him to stop. His hand trembled as he reached toward the Ancient Ones. Then the universe screamed. The absorption spell, weakened but not destroyed by Wong's sacrifice, suddenly accelerated. Without Strange actively controlling it, it had begun feeding on itself, on the mirror dimension, on the very concept of reality. The geometric pattern blazed with catastrophic light, pulling everything toward its center. With the gravity of a collapsing star, the Ancient One's eyes widened. "Stephen, what have you—" "I didn't!" For the first time, genuine fear cracked through Strange's voice. "It's out of control. I can't—" The spell had become a black hole of magic. It devoured the mirror dimension's infinite reflections, each one winking out like a snuffed candle. The remaining sorcerers from Kamar-Taj were torn from their positions, pulled screaming toward the vortex. Strange watched in horror as 3 of them dissolved into energy, their life forces feeding the spell he'd created. "Stop it," the Ancient One commanded. "You created this. You can unmake it." "I can't." Strange's composure shattered completely. He thrust his hands toward the spell, trying to weave bindings, trying to contain it, but his magic simply fed it more. Every entity he'd absorbed, every dark power he'd stolen, was now fuel for an apocalypse he couldn't control. "It's too powerful. It's going to consume everything." The Ancient One made her choice in an instant. She spread her arms wide and her form began to glow. "Then I'll stop it the only way left." "No." Strange realized what she was doing. "You'll cease to exist. Completely. No afterlife, no astral form, nothing." "I know." Her smile was gentle, almost peaceful. "That's what teachers do, Stephen. We sacrifice ourselves so our students might have a chance to learn." She flew directly into the spell's center. The Ancient One's essence was different from mortal sorcerers. She had existed outside normal time for so long that her being had become fundamental to reality's structure in subtle ways. When she entered the vortex, she didn't just feed it, she contradicted it. Her energy was order meeting chaos, wisdom meeting hunger, acceptance meeting desperate grasping. The spell convulsed. The geometric pattern shattered into fragments, each piece trying to reform and failing. The Ancient One's light blazed brighter and brighter as she poured her entire existence into creating a moment of stability, a single heartbeat where the spell might be stopped. "Now, Stephen," her voice echoed across dimensions. "End this. Save them." Strange stood frozen, watching his teacher die for the second time. Around him, the universe was still collapsing, slower now, but inevitable. He had seconds to make a choice. He could try to stop the spell, use the Ancient One's sacrifice to close the vortex, seal the damage, maybe save what was left of reality. It would cost him everything he'd gained, all the power, all the dark entities, all the potential to bring Christine back, gone forever. Or he could let the Ancient One's death be just another source of power, absorb her essence as the spell consumed her, use that final burst of energy to complete his transformation into Strange Supreme, become a god, remake everything, save Christine. His hands moved before his mind fully decided, muscle memory from 1,000 desperate surgeries, from years of practicing the mystic arts, from the core of who he'd been before grief broke him. But the gestures weren't for stopping the spell. They were for taking everything. "I'm sorry," Strange whispered, and he didn't know if he was apologizing to Wong, to the Ancient One, to Christine, or to himself. "I'm so sorry, but I can't stop. I won't stop, not when I'm this close." The Ancient One's eyes met his one final time. In them, he saw not anger or disappointment, but infinite sadness. She had known. Of course she had known. She'd always known how this would end. "Then I failed you," she said softly. "And I'm sorry for that, my student." Her light went out. Strange caught her essence as it dissolved, pulled it into himself along with the fragments of the shattering spell. Power beyond anything he'd ever felt crashed through him. The Ancient One's wisdom, her control, her connection to the fabric of reality itself, all of it became part of the growing storm inside him. The remaining sorcerers screamed and ran, opening portals to anywhere, everywhere, desperately trying to escape. Strange barely noticed them fleeing. He was too busy trying to contain the surge of energy threatening to tear him apart from the inside. His body convulsed. Bones broke and reformed. His skin split and healed and split again. The entities within him howled in agony and ecstasy as they were compressed, merged, forced to become one singular being. And through it all, Strange held onto a single image. Christine's face, the way she'd looked at him before the accident, when his hands were steady and his heart was whole. For her. Everything for her, even if it meant destroying everything else. The universe was dying, and it knew. Reality itself had become conscious of its own dissolution, a final, terrible awareness born from desperation. Galaxies that had burned for billions of years, guttered like candles in a storm. Planets simply ceased, their histories unwritten, their peoples never having existed. Time fractured into shards, each fragment showing a different moment of cosmic death, playing out simultaneously. And at the center of it all, Stephen Strange was becoming something that had never existed before. His transformation was no longer gradual. The absorption of the Ancient One's essence had shattered the last barriers holding him to humanity. His body expanded and contracted in impossible ways. At one moment a towering colossus of shadow and stolen light, the next a normal man with trembling hands and tears streaming down his face, then something in between that hurt to look at. The cloak of levitation finally tore free, its magic exhausted from years of trying to guide its corrupted master. It fluttered weakly away, dissolving into red particles that were immediately sucked into the spell's vortex. Strange barely noticed. He was too busy trying to hold himself together. The entities within him, thousands of demons, gods, eldritch horrors, and things without names, were no longer separate prisoners. They were merging, their essences crushing together under the pressure of the Ancient One's power. Their screams harmonized into a single reality-shaking roar that emerged from Strange's throat. Christine! Her name was a prayer and a curse, a promise and a threat. It echoed across dying dimensions, and somewhere in the fragmenting cosmos, an answer came. The spell responded. The geometric pattern that had been consuming the universe suddenly inverted, its structure folding inward. Instead of pulling reality into itself, it began pushing something out. The air split with a sound like the universe taking its first breath, and through the tear stepped a woman. She had Christine's face, Christine's eyes, Christine's gentle smile that had once made Stephen Strange believe in something beyond medicine and science and his own brilliance. But she was wrong. Her skin flickered between flesh and starlight. Her movements were too smooth, her smile too perfect. She was a reflection of a memory, of an echo. Reality's desperate attempt to give Strange what he wanted, to appease the cancer that was killing it from within. "Stephen," the not Christine said, her voice like wind chimes made of broken glass. "You did it. You saved me." Strange stared at her, his multiple eyes. When had he grown more eyes, unable to look away? Part of him, the part that was still human, still the surgeon who had loved this woman, screamed that this was wrong, an abomination, a puppet dancing on strings of dying cosmic law. But the larger part, the part that had consumed gods and drunk from the cup of ultimate power, didn't care. Christine. He reached for her with hands that kept shifting between flesh and shadow. I told you I'd fix it, I'd make it right." She stepped closer, her form stabilizing slightly as she approached. Behind her, the universe continued its collapse. Stars imploding, dimensions folding, the very concept of existence beginning to contradict itself. But Strange's attention was locked entirely on her face. "You broke everything for me," not Christine said, and there might have been sadness in her voice. Or perhaps that was just wishful thinking. The whole universe, Stephen. Was I really worth all this? Yes. No hesitation, no doubt. Strange's voice was layered now, a chorus of himself and all the beings he'd absorbed speaking in terrible unison. "You were worth everything. You are everything." She reached up, her hand hovering near his face but not quite touching. "Then show me. Complete the spell. Become what you need to become. Remake it all. Something in her words should have warned him. Some instinct from his days as a surgeon, reading symptoms and seeing the disease beneath. But Strange was beyond instinct now, beyond caution, beyond anything except the howling need to make his grief stop. He turned back to the spell. It hung before him like a miniature universe, all geometric perfection and impossible angles. The last fragments of reality were being drawn into it, the final stars, the last whispers of life, the ultimate moments of time itself. All Strange had to do was reach out and take it, absorb it, become Strange supreme. His hands rose and reality held its breath. Then the last sorcerer of Kamar-Taj made her move. She had been hiding, this final defender, a young woman whose name Strange had never learned, someone so junior she hadn't even been worth noticing. She had watched Wong sacrifice himself, seen the Ancient One dissolve into light, witnessed her friends and teachers torn apart by the spell they'd sworn to stop. And she had been preparing. The dark-hold page she clutched was ancient, forbidden, something the Ancient One had kept locked away for centuries. It contained a single spell, reality anchor, a way to freeze a moment of time, to crystallize it so completely that nothing could change until the spell was broken. She had cut her palms open, mixed her blood with the ink of elder gods, and written the activation sigils on her own body. It wouldn't stop Strange. Nothing could stop him now. But it might buy time, might give the universe a few more seconds to exist, might let her die trying instead of cowering. For Earth, she whispered and activated the spell. Her body erupted in silver light. The sigils burned through her skin, through muscle, through bone, spreading out in a wave that touched everything. Time crystallized around her in an expanding sphere. 1 second of existence frozen perfectly, held in place by her dying will. The wave hit Strange, just as his hands touched the spell. For a fraction of an instant, everything stopped. Strange, the spell, not Christine, the collapsing universe, all frozen in a moment of terrible potential. The young sorcerer could feel her consciousness fragmenting, her life burning away to fuel the anchor, but she held on, just a little longer, just. Strange's eyes snapped to her, even frozen in time, even locked in a moment of stasis. His awareness was too vast to be contained. He saw her, saw the spell she'd cast, saw her desperate, futile hope that this might make a difference. He almost admired it. Then he simply stepped out of frozen time. The entities he'd absorbed included beings that existed outside temporal flow, things for whom past and future were meaningless concepts. Drawing on their essence, Strange moved through the crystallized moment like a man walking through shallow water. Each step required him to shed a little more of what he'd been, a memory here, an emotion there, the last fragments of Stephen Strange, surgeon, being burned away to fuel his ascension. He reached the young sorcerer while she was still frozen, still pouring her life into the spell. Up close, he could see the determination in her eyes, the absolute conviction that she was doing the right thing. It reminded him of himself once, before he'd learned that doing the right thing was worthless if it meant Christine stayed dead. "You tried," he told her, though she couldn't hear him. "That's more than most, but you're fighting for a universe that's already dead. You just don't know it yet." He placed one hand on her forehead. The touch drained her instantly. The reality anchor spell collapsed as its power source was consumed, time rushing back in with a gasp. The young sorcerer's body crumbled to ash before it could even fall. Her essence pulled into Strange's growing mass, and with her death, the last resistance ended. Strange turned back to the spell, to not Christine watching him with her perfect, empty smile, to the universe hanging by its final thread. His hands, now definitely multiple hands, emerging from his torso at angles that violated geometry, reached out and grasped the geometric pattern. Power flooded into him. It wasn't like absorbing the entities had been. Those had been struggles, battles of will where Strange forced eldritch horrors to submit to his control. This was different. The universe wasn't fighting, it was surrendering. After billions of years of existence, of cosmic expansion and inevitable entropy, reality was simply too tired to resist anymore. It poured itself into Stephen Strange willingly, almost gratefully. He felt galaxies dissolving inside him, felt stars being born and dying in the space between his heartbeats, felt the memories of every living thing that had ever existed, trillions upon trillions of lives, loves, losses, all becoming part of his consciousness. It should have destroyed him. No mortal mind, no matter how enhanced, could contain that much information, that much experience, that much existence. But Strange wasn't mortal anymore. His body expanded beyond physical form. He became a silhouette against nothingness, a shape that suggested a man but could have been anything. The absorbed entities within him were no longer separate. They had merged completely into something new, something that had never existed in any reality. Strange Supreme was being born, and it was agony. Every moment of every life he'd absorbed played out simultaneously in his awareness. He was a mother watching her child die, a soldier pulling the trigger, a lover's first kiss and last goodbye, a civilization reaching for the stars and falling back into darkness. He was everything, experiencing everything, drowning in the weight of totality. "Make it stop!" The voice that emerged from him wasn't human anymore. It was the death rattle of a universe given sound. "Christine, where is she? Where?" Not Christine stepped forward, still smiling her perfect smile. She reached up and touched his face, or what had been his face, now just a vague suggestion of features in a mass of cosmic horror. "I'm here, Stephen," she said gently. "I'm right here. And you did it. You have all the power in the universe. You can do anything now. Then bring her back." Strange's voice was desperate, breaking. The real her, not you, not this echo. "Christine, my Christine, bring her back." Not Christine's smile faltered for the first time. "Stephen," she said softly, sadly, "I can't do that. You can't do that. Don't you understand yet? Christine died in a car accident and nothing, not all the power in the universe, not consuming reality itself, can change that. Death isn't a spell to be reversed. It's not a problem to be solved. It's just death." The truth hit him like a physical blow. He had destroyed everything, consumed the universe itself, become a god beyond gods, and it was all for nothing. Christine was still dead, would always be dead, because the only version of her he could create was this hollow reflection, this puppet wearing her face. "No." Strange's voice was barely a whisper. "No, that can't be. I gave up everything. I became this. There has to be a way. There has to be—" The universe exhaled its final breath. The last stars went out like candles in a flood. Strange felt each one die. Not metaphorically, not symbolically, he felt them. Every photon that ceased to be, every atom that simply forgot how to exist, every law of physics that unraveled like thread pulled from a tapestry. He was connected to it all now, bound to the death throes of reality itself, and he finally understood what he'd done. The mirror dimension shattered completely, its infinite reflections collapsing into a single point of absolute darkness. The dimensional barriers that separated realities dissolved, causing parallel universes to bleed into each other before they too winked out of existence. The quantum realm inverted, time and space swapping properties for a single impossible moment before both concepts ceased to have meaning. Strange Supreme hung in the growing void, his form still shifting, still trying to settle into something stable. The absorbed entities that made up his being were screaming, a chorus of damned gods and demons who had thought themselves eternal, now facing obliteration along with everything else. Because Strange had made a fundamental error. He had assumed that absorbing the universe would give him the power to reshape it, to go back, to fix everything. But he hadn't absorbed the universe. He had replaced it. He had pulled all of existence into himself. And now there was nothing left outside of him to reshape. No canvas to paint on, no reality to rewrite, just void, infinite, absolute, perfect void, and him. What have I done? The words fell from his mouths in a dozen different voices, each one thick with the realization of cosmic mistake. What have I? You won, not Christine said. She was the only other thing that existed now. This echo of the woman he'd loved, sustained only by Strange's power and desperate need. You became the most powerful being in existence. Congratulations, Stephen. Her tone had changed. The hollow sweetness was gone, replaced by something harder, something that almost sounded like anger if a construct made from dying reality could feel such things. I didn't want this, Strange said, and it was almost true. Almost. I wanted her back. You wanted to be God. Not Christine's form flickered, her stability failing as the last dregs of universal energy drained away. You wanted to be powerful enough that the rules didn't apply to you, that death was optional, that you could force the cosmos itself to give you what you wanted. For you, Strange reached for her, his hands, however many he had now, grasping at her fading form. I did this for you. No. She stepped back, her eyes finally showing something other than emptiness. Pity, perhaps. Or disgust. You did this for you, the real Christine. She would have hated this. She would have begged you to stop, to let her go, to find peace. But you never asked what she would have wanted, did you? You just decided that your grief was more important than the entire universe. The words cut deeper than any spell could have. Strange wanted to deny it, wanted to rage against the accusation, but he was beyond lying now, even to himself. The absorbed wisdom of the Ancient One, the memories of Wong's loyalty, the desperate sacrifice of the last sorcerer, they all echoed inside him, showing him the truth he'd been running from. He had destroyed everything for selfish reasons. The noble goal of saving Christine had been a lie, he told himself. The real reason, the core truth buried beneath layers of rationalization, was simpler and uglier. He couldn't accept that there was a problem he couldn't solve, that there was a wound he couldn't heal, that there was something his brilliance and will and power couldn't fix. Stephen Strange, the genius surgeon who had never met a challenge he couldn't overcome, had faced the one insurmountable obstacle, death, and his ego couldn't survive it, so he'd broken the universe. Instead, I'm sorry. The apology came out broken, fragmented across multiple voices. Christine, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean... I thought I could... I know what you thought. Not Christine was barely visible now, just a suggestion of a person against the void. And I know you're sorry, but sorry doesn't bring back the trillions of people you erased, doesn't restore the civilizations you unmade, doesn't fix anything. She faded a little more. Wait! Panic surged through Strange's vast, terrible form. Don't go! You're all I have left. Please, I can sustain you, I can... With what? Her voice was barely a whisper now. There's no more universe to draw power from, Stephen. No more stars, no more planets, no more life. You absorbed it all. And even your vast power has limits. I'm fading because there's nothing left to keep me here except your memory of what I was. Then I'll hold on to that memory forever. Strange's desperation made reality ripple, but there was so little reality left to ripple. I'll never forget. I'll keep you alive in my mind for eternity." "That's not life, Stephen, that's a prison." Not. Christine smiled one last time, and for just a moment, she looked almost real. Almost like the woman who had loved a brilliant, arrogant surgeon before his hands were broken and his soul went dark. "But I suppose that's fitting. You built a prison for yourself after all. Now you get to live in it forever." "No, please, I can fix this, I can—" But she was gone. The last echo of Christine Palmer dissolved into the void, and Stephen Strange supreme, the being who had consumed a universe, was truly alone. The silence was absolute. In all of existence, or the lack thereof, there was no sound, no light, no time passing or space expanding, just Strange, floating in an infinity of nothing, with only his thoughts for company, and those thoughts were screaming. Every being he'd absorbed, every entity he'd consumed, every soul he'd taken, they were all still conscious inside him. The demons howled, the gods wept. The Ancient One's wisdom provided crystal clear understanding of exactly how badly he'd failed. Wong's loyalty burned like acid, showing him every moment his friend had tried to save him. Worst of all were the normal people, the billions upon billions of ordinary lives that had been pulled into the absorption spell, the mother who'd been singing her daughter to sleep when existence ended, the old man who'd been watching a sunset that would never finish setting, the couple who'd been saying "I love you" for the last time, without knowing it would be the last time for all of reality. They were all inside him now, experiencing his isolation, his regret, his absolute and eternal damnation, and they blamed him. Oh, how they blamed him. Strange tried to silence them, tried to suppress the chorus of accusation and suffering, but he was them and they were him, all merged into one vast, terrible consciousness that could never escape itself. "I can fix this," he said to the void, his voice the only sound in all of non-existence. "I have all the power, all the knowledge. I just need to... But there was nothing to fix, no reality to restore. He'd consumed the fundamental building blocks of existence itself. The very concepts that would allow for creation were gone, pulled into him and locked away. He tried anyway. Strange Supreme gathered his vast power and pushed, trying to birth a new universe from his own essence. He shaped energy that didn't exist in space that wasn't there, following laws of physics that had been erased. For a moment, if moments could exist without time, something almost formed, a spark, a possibility. Then it collapsed, pulled back into him by the gravity of his infinite hunger. The spell that had consumed the universe was still active, still running, woven so deeply into his being that it couldn't be separated. Anything he created would immediately be destroyed, fed back into the cosmic engine of his own damnation. He tried again, and again, and again. Each failure cost him something. Memories burned away as fuel. Fragments of his sanity crumbled under the weight of repeated impossibility. The entities inside him died permanent deaths, their essences exhausted by futile creation attempts. Strange didn't care. He kept trying, kept pushing, kept desperately attempting to unmake his mistake through sheer force of will. It never worked. Hours passed, or years, or millennia. Time had no meaning anymore, but Strange's awareness continued, counting each failed attempt with perfect clarity. 1,000, 10,000, a million, a billion. Still he tried, and slowly, gradually, inevitably, Strange Supreme began to break down. Not physically, his form was beyond such limitations now, but mentally, spiritually, the core of what made him a person, what made him Stephen Strange, started to fracture under the weight of eternal isolation and infinite guilt. He forgot things, small things at first, the taste of coffee, the sound of rain, the feeling of accomplishment after a successful surgery, then bigger things, his mother's face, the name of his sister, the moment he'd decided to become a doctor. He clung desperately to his memory of Christine, but even that began to blur at the edges. Was her hair that shade of brown? Had her laugh sounded like that? Which side had her smile favored? No, he whimpered into the void. Not that. Please, not that. She's all I have left. But the void didn't care. Couldn't care. It was nothing, and nothing cannot show mercy. Strange Supreme pulled his fragmenting consciousness inward, compressing himself, trying to preserve what little remained of the man he'd been. The absorbed entities inside him were going quiet now, their suffering finally ending as they dissolved completely into the gestalt being he'd become. Soon there would be nothing left but instinct, a vast, powerful thing floating in emptiness, with no memory of why it existed or what it had lost. Perhaps that would be mercy. Perhaps oblivion was the only kindness left. But before that final dissolution, before Stephen Strange ceased to exist, even as a fragment inside Strange Supreme, he had one last moment of terrible clarity. He saw it all. Every choice that had led him here. Every moment he could have stopped. Every time someone had tried to save him and he'd pushed them away. Wong, the Ancient One, the desperate sorcerers of Kamar-Taj, even Christine herself in dreams and visions begging him to let her go. He'd ignored them all because he'd been so certain, so absolutely convinced that his way was right, that his grief justified anything, that his love gave him permission to break the world. And now he knew the truth. Love without wisdom was just another form of destruction. "I'm sorry," Strange whispered to the void, to the ghosts of everyone he'd killed, to Christine most of all. "I'm so sorry." The void didn't answer. It never would. In the nothing, Strange Supreme existed, not lived. Existence was too grand a word for what he'd become. He simply was, a monument to hubris floating in a self-made tomb of absolute zero. No light reached him because there was no light. No sound touched him because there was nothing to carry vibration. No time passed because time itself had been consumed, digested, and locked away inside the cosmic horror he'd become. He was everything that remained of a universe compressed into a singular point of awareness, and he was utterly, completely, eternally alone. The last fragments of Stephen Strange's personality clung to consciousness, like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Around them, or perhaps inside them, the distinction had long since ceased to matter. The absorbed entities had finally gone silent. Not dead, not really. They simply didn't exist as separate things anymore. All those demons and gods and eldritch horrors had merged completely, becoming undifferentiated parts of the whole. Strange Supreme was singular now, one being, one terrible cosmic mistake given form. And with that singularity came a horror worse than the cacophony of voices had been. Perfect, crystalline understanding of what he'd done. The Ancient One's wisdom, no longer fighting against Strange's will, showed him the full scope of his crime. He saw every life he'd erased, not as statistics or abstract numbers, but as individuals. The child who'd been learning to ride a bicycle, the artist who'd been mixing the perfect shade of blue, the elderly couple holding hands in their garden, married for 60 years, content, gone, all gone, never to exist again. He saw the civilizations that had reached for the stars only to have those stars extinguished. Species that had evolved over billions of years, developing art and culture and philosophy, erased in the span of a heartbeat. Ancient monuments to achievement and wonder, scattered across galaxies unmade before anyone could remember. They'd stood, trillions upon trillions of souls, each one precious, each one unique, each one carrying their own loves and losses and dreams, murdered, By him. For nothing. The guilt should have killed him, should have crushed what remained of his consciousness into oblivion. But Strange Supreme was beyond death now, beyond the mercy of non-existence. He was forced to endure, to remember, to understand with perfect clarity exactly what his obsession had cost. "Christine," he whispered, though there was no one to hear. The name was a talisman, a lifeline, the last human thing he could cling to. "I did this for you. It was all for you." But even as he said it, he knew it was a lie. The truth, unavoidable now, was that he'd done it for himself. His ego, his inability to accept failure. Christine had been an excuse, a noble cause to wrap around the ugly reality of his pride. She would have hated what he'd become, would have begged him to stop long before it reached this point. But he'd never asked her, never considered what she would have wanted, because that would have meant accepting her death, and Stephen Strange had never been good at accepting things beyond his control. In the void, Strange Supreme tried to weep, but he had no eyes anymore, no tear ducts, no body in any conventional sense. The grief remained trapped inside him, adding to the crushing weight of realization. This was his eternity now, floating in nothing, remembering everything, unable to die, unable to fix it, unable to do anything except exist with the knowledge of what he'd destroyed. Hell, it turned out, wasn't a place of fire and demons. It was this. Perfect isolation, perfect awareness, perfect regret, with no hope of redemption. Strange tried once more to create something, anything, from his own essence. He reached deep into the cosmic power he'd accumulated, drawing on reserves that could have fueled entire galaxies. He shaped it carefully, precisely, using every scrap of knowledge from every being he'd absorbed. A single flower bloomed in the void. It was beautiful, perfect, a rose with petals of crystallized starlight, existing in defiance of the emptiness. For one precious moment, Strange felt something like hope. If he could make this, perhaps he could make more. Perhaps, given enough time, and he had nothing but time, he could rebuild. Not the same universe, but something. Anything was better than nothing. The flower lasted 3 seconds. Then the absorption spell, woven into Strange's very being, activated automatically. The rose was pulled back into him, its light extinguished. Its brief existence ended. The spell didn't discriminate, couldn't discriminate. It consumed everything that wasn't Strange Supreme himself, feeding it back into the infinite hunger he'd become. He tried again, made a star this time, a small one, barely more than a spark. It died even faster, a planet, gone in an instant, a single atom, destroyed before it could fully form. The pattern was clear, undeniable, absolute. Anything Strange created would be immediately consumed. The spell that had devoured the universe was now a cage, preventing any new creation from existing. He had become Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, locked in an eternal cycle of futile creation and inevitable consumption. No. Strange's voice echoed in the emptiness, layers of pain and desperation. No, there has to be a way. I have all the power, all of it. I can... But power without purpose was meaningless. Knowledge without application was useless. He could destroy, he'd proven that spectacularly, but he couldn't create anything that would last. The very nature of what he'd become prevented it. Strange Supreme pulled his consciousness inward, examining his own structure with the precision of a surgeon studying an impossible tumor. The absorption spell was there, woven through every particle of his being. It was him and he was it, inseparable. To remove it would mean unmaking himself completely. For a moment he considered that option. If he ceased to exist, the spell would end. The void might give way to something. Perhaps the natural laws of physics would reassert themselves. Perhaps a new universe would emerge from quantum fluctuations, as his original universe supposedly had. Perhaps from his death, new life could eventually bloom. It would take billions of years, trillions maybe, an incomprehensible span of time for reality to heal from the wound he'd inflicted. But it would be something, a chance, a possibility that didn't involve eternal isolation. Strange gathered his will, preparing to tear himself apart at the fundamental level. He would scatter his essence across the void, disperse his power so thoroughly that it could never coalesce again. It would hurt. Oh, how it would hurt. But pain was temporary, wasn't it? He began the spell of self-destruction, and then he stopped, because a thought occurred to him, small and insidious and utterly damning. If he unmade himself, Christine would truly be gone. The memory of her he carried, the last echo of who she'd been, would dissolve into nothing. She would cease to exist even as a ghost in his mind, and he couldn't do it. Even now, even after everything, even knowing that his existence was a cosmic mistake that prevented any hope of new life, he couldn't let her go. "I'm sorry," Strange whispered to the void. "I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I'm sorry." The words became a mantra, the only prayer left to a being who had consumed gods. He repeated them endlessly, hoping that somehow, somewhere, Christine could hear him, that she would know he regretted it, that he wished he could take it all back. But the void remained silent, because there was no Christine to hear him. There was no one at all, just Strange Supreme and his guilt, locked together for eternity. The isolation began to reshape him in ways that went beyond physical. His thoughts started looping, following the same patterns over and over. He would remember Wong's sacrifice, feel the crushing weight of that loss, then start over and remember it again as if for the first time. The Ancient One's final words repeated in an endless cycle. The young sorcerer's defiant last stand played out again and again and again. Time, or the absence of it, was eating away at his sanity. Strange tried to hold on, tried to maintain some core of who he'd been. But without external stimuli, without change or growth or anything to mark one moment as different from another, his consciousness began to blur. Thoughts became difficult, memories fragmented. Even basic concepts started to slip away. What was hope? He couldn't quite remember. What did love feel like? The sensation was fading. Who was Christine? The name remained, but the person behind it grew increasingly abstract. A placeholder, a symbol of something lost. No. Strange forced himself to focus, pulling together the scattered pieces of his mind through sheer will. I won't forget. I can't forget. Forgetting means it was all for nothing. Forgetting means I lose the last piece of her. He clung to Christine's memory with desperate intensity, using it as an anchor against the tide of dissolution. Every detail he could recall, the way her nose crinkled when she laughed, how she always tucked her hair behind her left ear when concentrating, the exact shade of green in her eyes. But memories weren't meant to bear that much weight. Like photographs handled too often, they began to wear thin. The details blurred, the colors faded. Christine's face in his mind became less like a person and more like a sketch, then less like a sketch and more like an impression, then less like an impression and more like nothing. Christine! Strange Supreme's roar shook the void itself. Power erupted from him in waves, reality distorting energy with nowhere to go and nothing to affect. It crashed against the walls of his self-made prison and bounced back, a tsunami of cosmic force that accomplished nothing. He screamed until he had no voice left, raged until his fury burned itself out, struggled against the inevitable until exhaustion claimed him. And in the silence that followed, Strange Supreme understood the final terrible truth. This was forever. No rescue, no redemption, no escape, no end, just an eternity of isolation, guilt, and fading memories in an empty void. He had wanted to save Christine, to prove that death wasn't absolute, that love could conquer anything, that his brilliance and will could reshape reality itself. Instead, he'd created the ultimate monument to failure, a cosmic tombstone marking the death of everything, including hope itself. Strange Supreme hung motionless in the void, his vast consciousness finally going quiet. Not dead, he couldn't die. Not peaceful, he would never know peace. Just still, waiting for nothing, hoping for nothing, being nothing. The universe was gone. Christine was gone. Stephen Strange was gone. All that remained was the mistake he'd made, preserved forever in the absolute darkness he'd created. And in that darkness, Strange Supreme existed, and existed, and existed forever. The Watcher stood at the edge of non-existence, observing what Strange Supreme had become. He had seen many realities, witnessed countless timelines branch and diverge, each one a unique tapestry of choices and consequences. But this was different. This was a universe that had been murdered by love, twisted into obsession. "I warned you," the Watcher said softly, knowing Strange couldn't hear him, separated as they were by the walls of different realities. "I warned you that some things cannot be changed, that absolute power corrupts absolutely, that the price of defying natural law would be more than you could bear." Strange Supreme didn't respond, couldn't respond. He was trapped in his self-made hell, beyond the reach of even the Watcher's vast awareness. "You could have been one of the greatest sorcerers in all the multiverse," the Watcher continued. "Your potential was limitless, but you chose grief over wisdom, obsession over acceptance, power over peace." He turned away from the void, his duty as observer fulfilled. And now you are a warning, a reminder to all who would break reality for selfish ends. Your universe is gone, Dr. Strange, and you remain eternal and alone, exactly as you chose to be. The Watcher departed, leaving Strange Supreme to his endless isolation. In the nothing, the being who had once been a brilliant surgeon existed and remembered and regretted forever. May the Force be with you. More stories await.